My name is Duane Reynolds, and I am the founder and CEO of Just Health Collective. We're a professional services and advisory firm focused on accelerating health equity and belonging in health and healthcare. With February being Black History Month, we are highlighting the contributions that Black women have made in business and in healthcare. Black women have been leaders in our family units and the community for years, but especially of late, there has been more recognition of the opportunity that exists to elevate their talents. However, despite the gains that Black women have made, they are woefully underrepresented in CEO positions. In fact, since 1955, although there have been approximately 1,800 CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, only 2 have been Black women. When Ursula Barnes, the first Black woman to ever run a Fortune 500 company, was asked why Black executive women were not making it to the C-suite, she stated that Black women tend to get shunted away from positions of real impact and end up in career cul-de-sacs that eliminate them from consideration. According to a report by leanin.org and McKinsey, one big factor is a broken rung at the first critical step up to manager. For every 100 men promoted to manager, only 58 Black women are promoted, despite the fact that Black women ask for promotions at the same rate as men. This means that as you go higher up in the ladder, there are fewer and fewer Black women to promote because they aren't able to climb up at the manager level. But despite these difficulties that Black women are facing in our corporate world, they still express interest in becoming top executives and are motivated by a desire to positively influence company culture or to be role models for others like them. This description of Black women who want to lead reminds me of Renee DeSilva, an incredible Black female leader and friend of mine who has truly been motivated throughout her career to positively influence the companies she has worked at and is a role model for others. She started her career as a consultant at Accenture and later moved on to becoming the senior vice president at Advisory Board Company. She next worked as the executive vice president and chief talent officer at the Education Advisory Board. And now Renee is the CEO at the Health Management Academy. I'd like to welcome Renee and thank you so much for being our first guest on Chats with the Chief.
Thank you, Duane. It's an honor to be among your first guests and good to reconnect with you after all of these years. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. I couldn't think of a better person to represent Black women in leadership during Black History Month. So we really appreciate you being a part of our dialogue today.
Thank you.
So I'd like to start with the first question for you, which is, why do you believe Black women have been underestimated in the business and corporate world?
Yes, I spend a lot of time thinking about this topic. It's one that I've done some writing about recently on my own LinkedIn page. And I think there's a few structural challenges. I think you raised a really good one in terms of, in order to prepare yourself for a C-suite role, it probably started 15 years before the role that I arrived in now. And so I think there's something to be said about how you as a leader, a person that has influence, intentionally groom the talent bench so that you can pull up folks who are ready. I think what gets in the way of that oftentimes, and I would say all of us as leaders are vulnerable here, and I would put myself in that category, is we need to be intentional. This notion of you can slate someone for a role or you can have an open process around it. I think too often in corporate America, we do a lot of slating and tapping people versus having an open process. And that will always favor folks who maybe have the access to social networks or social capital that maybe make them a more logical or maybe an easier choice. So for me, it's really about investing in development very early on. And then as we all ascend to more senior roles, having a robust process around talent and succession management that will fuel the next bench of leaders. And I think over my career, I have been lucky enough and hopefully good enough to have had those things align for me quite nicely.
Yeah, I totally appreciate that. Really making an intentional effort in the succession planning process is important because, to your point, the majority of organizations today are still run by white males. And we have a tendency to actually display a bias towards folks who remind us of ourselves, folks that we sort of see a future for because they have qualities that we believe are consistent with leadership. But I think we have to broaden our definition of what a leader looks like and create that space and intentionality around pulling folks into leadership roles.
I agree. If I could add one thing to that, I think the other piece of that often is as you're leading organizations, ensuring that you are giving feedback, often critical feedback, to folks who you think can continue to ascend. And I think if I go back and look at the major points in my own career path that were pivotal to me, it was getting the feedback that I needed to hear that was a blind spot. And there's a lot of data that would tell you that women tend to get less feedback for whatever reason. And that also can be one of the things that makes it quite hard to advance. So I think feedback-rich environments, talent development programs that spot high potential folks and help clear obstacles are really a big part of getting greater representation in our senior leadership ranks.
Yeah, I totally appreciate that. And I think inherently Black women are so resilient. So hearing that feedback for them is only going to make them better, because they're likely to work very hard to correct any type of deficiency that is going to stop them from ascending higher. So my next question is, what are some of the challenges of being at the intersectionality of both Black and female?
Yes. So I think the major challenge there, I'm going to answer this in two ways. So the story that I tell myself, and that I think is an important takeaway for the folks that are listening, is when you are the only in the room, you're the only woman, you're the only person of color, it sometimes can get in your head in a way where you may just mute yourself. You may be slightly less open to making a statement that might be provocative. You might be a little timid to let your perspective be heard because you are aware that you are often the only. And there's a soundtrack in your head sometimes that maybe makes you play small. And so, as I think about over the last several years when my career has accelerated, getting over that self-talk has been a really important part of me feeling like I can contribute at the levels that I know I can contribute at. And that is, I won't say that that's completely all self-imposed. There's a lot of signals that we get in society and structurally that would sort of make someone feel that way. But I think my own sort of personal journey has been one around feeling like I am not only at the table, but I need to be contributing and leading that table. And some of that has been my own work that I've done for myself. The second piece of that is this notion of familiarity in our networks. And so for most folks who are in leadership positions, they tend to be white men. And I will say that much of my career acceleration has come from really strong white male advocates, for sure. But Black women may not really be in their circle in a broad way. And I push on this even with my kids' classes, is oftentimes when we go to birthday parties or we go to social events, we are the only Black family that's been invited, right? So if your social networks are not diverse, your work networks are not diverse. And so you're going to be a little bit uncomfortable navigating conversations with people who don't come from the same experience as you do. So I think for broadly, it's incumbent upon all of us to build circles around us that are diverse and don't necessarily just mirror ourselves. And for those of us who may be the first or the only or among the few, it's being confident and being okay with speaking truth to power, even when it can be a little bit uncomfortable, regardless of your title or tenure.
Yes, I completely appreciate that. And one of the reasons I think Black History Month is so important is not only to recognize the contributions, but really to speak to the positive narrative that we have to, as Black people, understand. And we have to rewrite our own stories in some ways to really realize the value that we can bring by our voice, by our frame of reference. And one of the things that I've really found most helpful in my career is really getting to the center of who you are, because it is exactly who you are that will bring benefit in many different ways than you've ever imagined inside of these companies. So I really appreciate that perspective of really owning your power, speaking truth to power, being confident, and really rewriting your narrative.
Yeah, Duane, I've spent a lot of time on this, and I've taught a few sessions in previous roles around what is your personal brand, what is your narrative, what is unique about you in a way that isn't full of bravado, but what do you do better than anyone else does? And sitting with that, making space for exploring that. And I found for me, the answers to those things aren't always the sexiest, right? Like, I think I'm very good at getting things done, and I've been effective in aligning myself in roles where the ability to cut through noise has been incredibly important for the organization, and that's opened up opportunities. And so, if there's a takeaway, because I always like these chats to be actionable, and this is true for all of us, but what is your power alley? When are you in your flow? And oftentimes when you can align company needs with your gifts, it unlocks opportunity in ways that can be really transformational.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I felt like in my career, the moment at which I accelerated was when I accepted the gifts that I had to give to the company, and there was alignment. So very, very good words of wisdom there. So in thinking about the corporate environment, corporate world, what do you believe to be some of the unique challenges that Black women may face in an environment that wasn't really crafted for your presence?
Yeah, I mean, I still feel it is palpable when you are in a room and you don't see others like you reflected. And in most rooms that I'm in, even today, that would be the reality. So I would say that to me feels like one of the biggest. There's just an awareness there, and so I think that's a piece of it. I'm also very cognizant of how I communicate in a way to hold a position, but be dispassionate about that position, because I'm aware of the broader context or view that some may hold around Black women, or even women who have a strong view being overly aggressive, coming on too strong. And so I'm always aware of the way in which I may need to frame something might need to be very different than what a peer might do if he weren't sitting in my skin quite literally. Now, I do think that the executive voice that I've developed over the years, which is grounded in my view of what is different for me based upon my background, serves me very well, because I can make a very good argument, and I can do it in a way where I am not emotional about it, and my point lands with some power. And so I think that served me well, but I think it can be lonely. I think the combination of being the only person in the room that looks like you, and then being aware of maybe how the world views women in particular, and Black women as well, does impact how you show up. And for me, I'm probably just over 2 years into my first CEO position. I will say that also has given me some newfound freedom, because if not me to make the point, who can make the point? So I've been much more active and vocal around my views around race and my own personal experience with it in my own family, and the platform I have is a privilege, and I need to make sure that I'm quite intentional around how I voice those things. So those are a few ways in which I think about that.
Well, I appreciate that, and you definitely are serving as a role model in that space, opening up conversations and thoughts about things that, heretofore, without being in those leadership roles at the C-suite, perhaps those conversations didn't occur. And we really appreciate the fact that you are there and representing that frame of reference.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in thinking about the women that you admire, what it is about them, and how do you aspire to reflect that in your own leadership?
Yes. So one of the really deep places of gratitude I have for my role at the Health Management Academy is we are so connected to health system leaders, both on the provider side and the broader industry. And particularly on the provider side, there's a real mission-based mantra to their work that I draw a lot of inspiration from. The one person that comes to mind for me in particular in that category is Dr. Janice Nevin, who is the CEO of Christiana Care. And she recently led a whole rebranding of the Christiana system around for the love of health, like love and excellence as being guiding principles. And you often don't hear about love and work being connected. And so I really draw a lot from just the willingness to go in that direction and just how rooted that is in mission. So she'd be one exemplar. I think of outside of providers, folks that can really get deep on content and carry the room in a way that no matter where the topic is going, they've got something to pull through, and that takes a significant amount of preparation and presence in the moment. And there are so many folks on, particularly within our corporate membership side, that do that so elegantly. So this combination of being mission-based, really deep on the topics and forces that are converging on health system are hopefully the bodies of work that I try to pull through in my own day-to-day leadership style. Mm-hmm. And then the only thing that I would say is I get a lot of direction and coaching and mentorship from my tribe of peers. And so I've got two really strong groups of women friends, some from college, some from my very long advisory board tenure. And I get so much inspiration from all the work that I see them doing. And that has been key to my own mental health and resilience through the pandemic for sure.
Yeah. I love that concept of a tribe. I've also heard of it called your personal board of directors. Yes. And that is so critical to have to keep you grounded, make sure that you are being supported in really challenging times. I also know Janice, and I had the opportunity to visit that health system. And there is something very different about expressing love. But really, the delivery of healthcare services is about being empathetic and demonstrating love. So I really, really enjoy that concept and think that she is a great leader and certainly to be admired.
Absolutely.
So my last question for you has to do with your younger self.
Yes.
And what would you say to your younger self about your potential in the world as an African-American female leader?
Yes, my younger self. Yeah. She and I have lots of chats. I mean, honestly, I think the biggest thing that I would tell her is just to take a little bit of a breath. I approach everything, particularly in my early tenure, as just this massive sprint. Some of that, just my own personal story, which I'm very public about. I had my oldest daughter very young. I had her in college. And so I've always felt like this need to demonstrate my achievement orientation and my ability to sort of show that I am worthy. And so there's always been that like internal intrinsic push of just being so focused and achievement oriented. And that has served me well. And yet I might tell my younger self just to take a breath, that careers and career paths are not linear, that you have moments of acceleration and moments of pause, and both are really important for the long haul. I would tell her that she should get out of her comfort zone faster. I stayed at one company for 18 years. It serves me really well, but I sometimes wonder, had I taken a little bit of a different path, where might that have served me? I would have, I also think about this notion of asking for what you want. The hard part of asking for what you want is not always the ask. It's knowing for yourself, what do I want? It's much easier for all of us as people to comment on the things that we don't want. Even in my own conversation with my colleagues now, it's centering on what is it that you want? How does that sort of contribute to the direction that we're going in, and being really clear on your ask? And I think I missed a few opportunities along the way to do that with rigor. And the final point that I would like to make, I know this is centered around the experience of Black women, which I appreciate because not a ton of conversations are centered around this, but I don't want to miss the role of men in particular in this conversation. And I would say, in talking with many of our health system CEOs, most of whom are men, they are engaging in different kind of ways that I've seen across my career. Like, people are really willing to have courageous conversations right now. I wonder if you're seeing that in your own work, Duane, because you're as connected in that space, as more connected really than I am. And so maybe if I had a closing sentiment, and I think a lot about that, one thing that has served me well is the power of the nudge. And by nudge, I mean, when you are around people and you see that they have some potential, don't always wait for them to raise their hand. Let them know what you see in them. Pull them into roles that maybe they're not quite ready for, but you can see the potential of how they might impact. And I think if all of us whom are in positions of power or influence or decision-making thought about the nudge and used it really intentionally, then I would hope to think that for my daughter's generation, one is 26, one just turned 15, that they will not be the one and only in the room. And that to me would be the legacy that I hope the work that I'm doing, the work that you're doing, really brings to bear.
Yes, thank you for that. And so men who are in our conversation today, use that nudge. Seek out women who you see as talented and can move up the career pipeline. Sometimes it really does take that one person to spark their confidence level and help to build their career moving forward. So we have about 10 minutes left. And the first thing I want to do is to let everyone know that we will be having our next session on March the 10th. And our guest is Josh Williford, who is the Chief Financial Officer of a company called OSO. So we would love for you to join us during that next conversation. And I'd like to take a few questions from the audience if we're able to.
Sounds great.
So if you can just put your questions in the chat box, we will respond to them there. Okay, doesn't look like any questions are coming through just yet. But we'll
Duane, there is a statement that I think maybe we could even frame as a question, which is from Ellen around not to forget sponsors and mentors and their importance in one's career. And Ellen, I think that's a great sentiment to share. And for my own career, those folks have showed up in shown up in very different times. And sometimes they've been women, sometimes they've been men. But I do think this notion of there's a difference between sponsorship and mentorship, right? So the notion that mentoring people is really helpful in coaching them, giving them real-time feedback. The power of sponsors. A sponsor should feel accountable for your own success. And I've been very lucky across my career to have folks come in and out of my life that served in that capacity. But Ellen, that's a great point in terms of the importance of being on the receiving and giving end of that relationship.
Absolutely. How many, out of curiosity, Renee, how many relationships do you have where you would consider yourself a sponsor for individuals?
I have a broad base of folks whom I mentor. I would probably be able to count on one hand the folks that I feel like I have a sponsor relationship with. Yes. And that's because I think to do that well, you've got to, someone cannot pair you as a sponsor, in my opinion. Like you have to cultivate that relationship in a way that's genuine. And so I think about people on my own team right now who at some point I could see them taking my job. And that to me, that is like, we all should be thinking about how we advance folks to do more than we're doing. I always think through like, who do I want to work for one day? And those are the folks that if I have that level of respect for the quality of their work, those are where I feel like the sponsor relationships can be the most powerful.
Yeah, I would agree. I've had a few people like that I've crossed in my career who you definitely can see yourself working for them.
Yes. Yeah.
Those are the ones to pull forward and invest in.
That's exactly right. We'd be happy to.
Yeah. So it doesn't look like any questions have come through, but we definitely appreciate everyone that's attended today. This was our first LinkedIn Live session, and Renee has been a wonderful guest. And it looks like we do have one question that may have come through. Do you have a feeling about the community being partners with the company?
Yeah. So Cheryl, I appreciate the question. I think where you're going with this is, what is the role of employers in ensuring that the community around them is also on the journey, maybe with them. So I may be adding a little bit of interpretation here, but I think it's important. I think the larger ecosystem that we're all operating in really matters. I think there's probably more that even my own organization intends to do around building maybe talent pipelines that sort of come from communities that are less represented into how we think about recruiting. And so I do think that is an incredibly important part of thinking about the folks that you reach as not just the ones that are in the four walls of your organization, but in the context of the community in which you serve. So that's a great point that you made. Thank you for that.
Yeah. I would add that I think is more of a realization that organizations, corporate organizations, community-based organizations, anchor institutions like hospitals and health systems are realizing that part of the work that they have to do to build trust is to invest in the community, to create economic opportunities, to support nonprofits, to build relationships with historically Black colleges and universities and other academic institutions to really lift all boats in the community, and it actually benefits everyone. So thank you for that prompt, because I do think that's an important perspective for organizations to understand, particularly given the time that we're living in now. So we have one more question, and this will be our last question. How do you think about corporate allyship as opposed to sponsorship and mentorship?
Duane, I'm happy to take that. I feel like this is the domain that you are an expert in, so I would also give you an opportunity to chime in there.
Sure. So when I think about allyship, you don't have to be an executive to be an ally. Anyone in the organization can be an ally, and an ally really means understanding, learning, and then taking an issue on as your own to advocate for more marginalized groups that may exist inside of your company or outside of your company for that matter. So being an ally is really about being that supportive individual that learns and takes issues on as their own to advance equity and equality.
I love that. My closing wrapper on that would be back to my earlier comment, which I feel like I made a few times around being the only in settings. It's really helpful when you have an ally who maybe will raise the issue that perhaps maybe more impacts your race or your gender or your sexual orientation. To not have to be the one that raises their hand and sort of comments on that is incredibly freeing. And so that is a great way for all of us to contribute into the environments that we work on, is feeling like you can raise an issue even if it doesn't impact you personally. That deep gratitude for people who are willing to do that.
Yes, absolutely. So thank you all so much again for attending our first LinkedIn Live Chats with the Chief, a Belonging dialogue. And thanks to Renee DeSilva, who is an amazing CEO and mentor and just light in this space, for being our first guest.
Thank you.
And catch us next time, Chats with the Chief on March the 10th. Thank you.
Thanks, Duane.